And at Buddhahood, you'd have it constantly, but from a detached point of view, meaning you're not locked into the suffering that you're perceiving. Another story. But it is filled with cognitive dissonance, and I think it's for a reason. Okay. So bardo, what do you know about the bardo?
Transitions.
So it's a stage in between
death and rebirth.
Death and rebirth. Yeah. We'll talk about how you enter the bardo at the end of the class today. At what point the elements of the body break down, like we talked about last class, and then you might begin to perceive yourself as a certain type of bardo being that correlates to what? The type of
Your next birth.
Great. So the kind of shape or perceptions you begin to form in the bardo realm, which is not counted as one of the 6 realms. Yeah. It's like the in-between place. Has a correlation to the type of life you're going to have later. Great. So let's talk sustenance. Give me a couple of types of sustenance that you remember.
Sleep, food.
Sorry?
Sleep,
Sleep
food.
is a sustenance for
Body.
the body, because there are 2 lists
right,
of sustenances,
right.
remember? Yeah, one was the 4 types of sustenance.
Something weird, like something about like a fraction of something, or like a part of something.
That's good. Something that's good. Yeah.
Oh.
It's like needing water, and then like say you're in a desert, you need water, and then there's the thing that also is a sustenance that you know it's nearby, so your mind projects that it's nearby, so that's a sustenance, and then the mind that's projecting that it's nearby is a sustenance, and then the consciousness that contains that mind.
Right, those 3 were weird, right? So
Those
that's
are the
what you
4,
first
right?
described was stained consciousness.
Right.
Yeah. The other one was portion.
Oh,
Right.
Is that what you were talking? There were 2
Yeah.
types of portion. Do you remember that?
Subtle and gross.
Gross. Gross, which is the stuff we eat and drink, which is called substance, and then subtle, which is stuff that is hard, like smells and so on. Yeah. And what are those subtle? Which beings are?
Smelling.
Yeah,
Subtle
great.
beings.
Yeah, great. So bardo beings also known as smell eaters. Yeah. And then the other ones is stained consciousness, which is the contact between object consciousness and
Staying calm.
the eye power, for example, for seeing the drink, and that gives you hope and a little bit of sustenance to continue. And then it's a more subtle way of that, staying movement of the mind, the thing that activates what you do and what you say, and then mind itself, that a being for being, the sustenance for being is mind. Yeah, it's just more ideas about how the mind continues, and the nourishing of the body. One of them was sleep,
Food.
food, yeah,
Concentration.
concentration, yeah, which was a bit, the concentration itself is a kind of sustenance, is a very interesting idea, yeah. The Ting and Xing labeling of that, the capacity to stay at peace, in single focus could be a sustenance. So then let's talk fantastic cosmos. Give me some ideas of what you remember from a mandala world, the swirling of the beginning of this time of the universe, before we talk about time and space. What do you remember from the mandala? How did it begin?
They're like a wind.
Yeah, so wind begins, the turn, in empty space, begins to come together over millions of kalpas, like millions of years, many kalpas, right? And until they swirl enough to create a solid basis, and it's hard as diamond, and there's a gold base, or water disk, blah, blah, blah. And then you get the cosmology that we create through a mandala. 4 continents, 7 mountain ranges, 7 seas, 4 sides to Mount Meru, each one has a color, the 4 continents have subcontinents, remember that? Great. Looks something like that. The beginning looks something like that. From the top, we are in Zambu, where humans live, this corner of the universe, if you like. And when we fill that with all these magnificent metaphorical entities like the wish-fulfilling cow, the wish-fulfilling tree, the mountain of diamonds, the lady of this, the lady of that, the Rinpoche of that, the Rinpoche of that, the sun and moon, etc. That's the formal 37-part mandala offering, which we do when we, a summary of when we do the short mandala.
Is that a new picture?
No, that was there last week.
Okay.
Right, and then we talked about hells. Do you remember hells? Give me some hells. Give me the hells. 8 hot, 8 cold. Yeah, do you remember some characteristics about beings in a hot hell? What's your memory?
They're not in good shape.
Not good. Not good is a good answer for hell. Not so good.
And they stay that way for a long time. Takes a long time.
Yeah, so time is slowed down in comparison or in relation to us. Yeah, that's interesting. Give me some memories that you've got from the descriptions of those yucky places.
They like poof out of being again. In one of the hells, it's so hot that they just like, and then there's just the sound of their body.
Great. Do you remember the name of that one? It's called Avicii Hell.
No.
It's the hell of no respect.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that's the lowest of them all, where you are just like an incandescent thing because you are singed from like with a what's the word, like an extinguisher of fire, like a fire extinguisher, like a not an extinguisher, but you know, a creator, like that. Okay, and then we talked about 8 cold hells, 4 adjacent hells, and partial hells, which happen like that. These were all states of being that if you think karma and emptiness, you can see how it would be possible to create enough karma consistent to create this kind of state. If you have any of these things, and if karma does multiply every 24 hours, so 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, etc., in terms of gravity and time, then even the subtlest dislike can turn into the most horrific experience. But equally, the most beautiful, kindest activity can also multiply to sitting in a class where you get told how to get out of suffering, for example. That's burning up goodnesses if it's a pleasant sensation. Yeah?
This is a question I have. If it is a projection of emptiness, or if emptiness is the state that we project onto, how is there not 9 hot realms? Do you know what I mean?
You mean as opposed to 20 or 5 or 3? Yeah. Yeah. So it's a good thing. Why isn't there 25 and a half, or you know, exactly. The same question could be applied to why is there 6 realms and sometimes 5 and so on. You know, how many races are there in the world? Tell me how many human races there are.
It depends how you divide it.
Oh, group it into 3 main ones. Like that, you see. You could group it into 500,000, or you could say, oh, there's a bunch of Asian people, and there's a bunch of Western people, and a bunch of African people. But that doesn't cover everybody. But there's 3 main modes, yeah, of we can say. You could say 5. What are the 5 big groups of humans? Well, there are this type of Africans and this type of Americans, and you know. And so nominally they appear that way through the eyes of beings in this realm. But is it that way only and that way from its own side? Never. You know, so the Buddha must have known what he was talking about when he said, generally there's 6 landing destinations that you could do if you're in samsara. And what it's really relating to is not the place or the kind of people. It's actually relating to the mental afflictions that create those places or those experiences. If you think about it, if you think about pretas and greed and so on, that amplified is a crater realm. And within crater realms, there are subtypes of craters, right? So, and within animal realms, how many animals are there? You know, well, we can divide them into flying animals and walking animals and swimming animals. Is that all the animals? Well, not really. You know, yes.
I guess there's just something that happens in my mind, which is useful, I guess, for me to recognize, which is that, like, you see these things, and you're like, 8, and 8, and 4, and I now know something. You know, like, there's a solidity to it.
Yeah.
That's really not the intention in a way.
But it's just the beginning, you know, it's the beginning. However you can connect with it, then use it as, it doesn't have a nature of its own, you know.
Yeah.
But if understood through the nominal awareness that we have, like I know if I say this word, you're more likely to understand the meaning. That still holds true because we're sharing this realm. You know, if I'm in another group, when I'm in Bushwick, I tend to use different words to get the same meaning. Yeah. You know, and I'm in South America, and all of a sudden the words don't have these sounds even; they have different sounds, but the meaning is the same. So it's just a structure to hold on to that we, at best guess, think connects with each other, and that's Dharma is just this illusion that pops up, and then in the Diamond Cutter Sutra, do you remember what the Buddha said in the Diamond Cutter Sutra, referring to a previous time? That, oh monks and nuns, at some point you will have to burn the boat of Dharma to really see what I'm talking about. You know, which is talking about there isn't 8. Yes, there's 8. Right? Does that help? Yeah. Cool. So let's talk, and that was, who was that? Dante, yeah. And it was very similar, and that was quite canny, which is saying from a human view, those, you know, what I like about that is that those accessing this extraordinary view of the world, not ordinary, beyond ordinary view of the world, seem to have come to a similar conclusion. You know, and you could say that to be true for many of the mystical traditions on the planet. They talk about oneness, they talk about giving, they talk about this thing. So they function that way for us, and so you grab onto the machine that functions until you're running on the machine and you realize the machine wasn't ever that machine in the first place. And that's really a metaphor for your own transformation. You know, I'm a human learning all this stuff, and then you apply all this stuff and you realize you were never human to apply any stuff. And we can have that experience in everyday life, and that should be proof enough to say we're able to transform, you know. None of us were born speaking English, none of us were born walking, you know. None of us were born speaking another language, none of us were born beatboxing. It was just an idea at the beginning, and then all of a sudden we applied something and we transformed into that, and then we build identities and structure around that, and we think that's our limit, but there's beyond that limit too. Thanks for the opportunity to talk. There is, let's talk about time and space. This one will be quick so we can do some class. What do you remember? What are kalpas?
Hell of a lot of time.
Yeah.
Eons.
Hell of a long time. How many types of kalpas do you remember being described in the Abhidharma?
4.
4? Good. Give me one of them. It's really simple once you
Very simple once you. Oh, yeah.
Destruction, continuation, formation. Great. Eon. You know, I think that's right. So eon of destruction, you know, and then there was 20 intermediate eons. Yeah? Is that what's up there? Eon of destruction, 20 intermediate eons. Describe the events at the eon of destruction. Do you remember when an eon of destruction of a world system, the destruction of a world system, ends with 6 and 7 suns supernovaing? Do you remember that? What marks the beginning of an eon of destruction?
Lifetimes.
Lifespans get.
No? Bam.
The emptying of the lower hell.
Nice. Yeah. So at the point that no more beings are born in Avicii hell, in that incandescent hell, that marks the beginning of an eon, bloody long time of destruction. It means that picture that you saw, the huge mandala system or the galaxy, is about to collapse and supernova. There's some supernovas, and then there's all these ways that it can supernova through a human machine made to explode, through the collision, blah blah blah. There's all this description.
Does that mean there's more virtue? That means there's more virtue?
No. On the contrary, it's actually a dip. It's not a virtue.
Why?
And why are there no beings born in the Vichy hell?
Yeah.
Right.
Good question. Why?
Wasn't it that they moved to a different?
Another Vichy hell, some other
Yeah.
place. Yeah. Another world system exists somewhere else. This is not the only world system. So, yeah.
What do you mean this is not the only world?
It's America, damn it. So that's the destruction. Then there's a continuation and a formation, right? So all of them have 20 intermediate eons, and I can't remember the times I gave you, but I think a great eon came up to 1.28 trillion years or something parallel to the creation of a galaxy or something like that. And a great eon was how many continuation eons or how many intermediate eons?
16.
Let's see if we got it. Did we get it up there? 4 continuation is or 80 intermediate. Yeah? Cool. And how many eons does it take to become a Buddha through the sutra path according to the Abhidharma Kosha? Or the Buddha himself, actually. Do you remember?
Is it like
70.
3 great eons?
3 great eons. Great, fantastic. How many zeros were at the end of a great eon? 30, right?
10 to the power.
Long bloody time. Yeah.
I remember the description of the 16 mile by 16 mile by 60 mile box that you fill up with a grain of rice.
Oh, okay, great. So do you remember
Every-
that? So there was a 16 mile, yeah, by 16 mile by 16 mile cube
Yeah, and you fill it up with a grain of rice
with a sesame seed, which is like a quarter of a grain of rice.
once every year?
Every 100
Every
years.
Once every 100.
Once every 100 years?
Something like that. And then you place it there and you wait 100 years, and then you put the second one, and that gets filled up before a great eon finishes. Yeah.
So, no.
I have a question. I know we need to get to class
So why are you asking?
because I have an ego. Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. Let my ego meet your ego.
In terms of actual wanting to experience
No!
something, why?
Sorry.
Why do we study this?
Sorry, say that again.
Why? Why do we spend time on this?
Yeah.
I love it. I'm fascinated by
Yeah.
time and all of its
Yeah.
bendings, but like, why do we spend time on
Yeah,
this? Because
good.
this is just an idea. It's like trying to fathom a Google.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
why do we actually?
It's
spend
a
time on
great
this?
question. So a couple of reasons, I think. Do you remember the 3 ways to interpret this stuff? So
Literally, metaphorically,
metaphorically
and
and karmically, right? So the question is rather, why did Geshe Michael choose to teach it? Because most teachers of Buddhism avoid like the hells teaching this part of the Abhidharma Kosha because it sort of seems to conflict with Western ideas of the universe and the cosmos.
Even in the Geshe path, even
Mhm.
like what Geshe Tashi would study, would they study this? Like
Yeah, all of them would study this, absolutely. Yeah. But why would we Westerners, that we know better because we've got telescopes, right? So why would we study this? And I think it comes down, why would Geshe Michael choose to translate this part and choose to conduct a set of study around it? And I think it has something to do with the 3 ways to interpret it. Yeah. So definitely it's, I think, to dismiss the idea that it's a literal under Bodh Gaya, there are hells, and to dismiss that. I think it's also to push the boundary of us thinking it's just a metaphor for you're in a hell realm when you get really angry, and really we'll all be pretty humans forever, right? So I think it's also to dismiss that. And I think it's to drive home the message of karma and emptiness, to say if you really believe you can become enlightened, then you can also believe that the fluctuation between the extremes of being don't necessarily fit your little wish that we'll be just humans.
Fourth time is what we think it is.
Yeah, so fourthly, I think it's to jolt and disrupt our solid idea of time and space and realms of existence. Because we think we know everything in this realm. And so did every single bastard before us. Yeah? And so, who was right if everybody was right? So I think it's, yeah, you're still American. So I think it's a good question, but I think it's to disrupt our solidity to what we hold to be absolutely correct, because I saw a picture of the Earth sitting in black space, therefore that's the only way to conceive of my world. And if that was true, if we were really that, only that, from its own side that, then every being must see and know and experience that. Push us to force us to come to the edges of knowing begins to open the door for the possibility of considering the reality of karma and emptiness. And we come to conflict, and I think that's why he taught it. I don't know really, but that's what I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Last week we talked about 4 parts of death contemplation. Death, remember, we didn't call it death meditation. Jason Kappa wanted to say death awareness habituation. Remember? Gone habituation, because it wasn't just sitting down on the cushion and reviewing certain steps. It was walking with that conception every minute of your day in order to drive you to do certain things, and we'll talk about them today. But before we go there, he starts with there's 4 parts to death contemplation. Remember, he gave us some benefits for them. Let's see if we've got them. The first one is the disadvantages of not doing this, right? And here are some of them. What was the next one? So he talks about the disadvantages.
Advantages.
Yeah, great. So it's Tibetan, right? Then the advantages. So the disadvantages were, do you remember, or did you read them? What were they? You don't practice, you get stuck in your life, you think your life is everything, you end up buying cars and getting a better job, dead. Yeah. Some of the disadvantages. Advantages are, your practice gets pure, you gain some power.
It helps you get started.
Cool, because you sit there and go, hold on, this is going to happen to me, this is going to happen to me. And we saw Herbie, do you remember last week we saw Herbie die? Yeah? Who found that really hard to watch? Yeah, I found it hard. And I've been around death a little bit, but there's something about every time seeing someone go, it's hard. Then when you say, that's me, that's gonna be me, then it should drive you to take some action. What was the next one? The third point that Tsongkhapa did. First he said, this is all the things that are bad if you don't do it. These are all the things that are good if you do it.
What it is and isn't.
Yeah, this is what it is and this is what it isn't. He goes, it's not sitting there and getting terrified that you're going to die. It's not that. It is though going through the process, right? But it's also to focus our minds on things we have to focus them on, being aware of it all the time. Yeah. The minimum motivation for a Buddhist, remember, is
To have a
rebirth that's human or above, right? Minimum motivation. So the minimum motivation is your next rebirth. Other than that, you're not even a Buddhist if you don't, you know, minimum qualification of the lowest scope. Medium scope is to be a Buddhist of the medium scope is, yeah, like, okay, I'll figure out nirvana, I'll get myself out of samsara. And highest motivation?
To bring everyone
Yeah, so well, if I can do it, it doesn't take too much of a step. If I can do that, then surely I can do that for everybody else. Yeah. David?
But isn't
Is it your ego or is it?
It's my ego.
Okay, let's hear it.
Isn't it pretty bad karma though to be born as a pleasure being?
No, the definition of being born as a pleasure being results from good karma, but it has ignorance in it, or it hasn't achieved certain aspects of the path. They say that we're just the right tightness as beings for humans because we have enough mixture of pleasure and pain. Yeah. but since you're on it, do you remember all the different levels of the form and formless realm, why beings are born in those different levels? Like,
The subtleties of their practice.
great, so it's a direct reflection of the kind of depth of meditation practice that you have in a human form or in a previous form, right? So I think I'm interpreting Buddha now, so I'm Hector now speaking. Yeah, I haven't heard this anywhere. But having chewed through that idea, why would there be beings who have 500 years of pleasure and then drop down to the lowest hell within a few days of recognizing? I think that the writing the Abhidharma is that these beings live for 500 years in pleasure and they're all lovely and everything smells lovely and fantastic and there's subtle forms and da da da. And then in a few days towards the end of the 500 years, they have fixed lifespans. A garland gets placed on them with flowers and the flowers dry up, and that's a sign that your karma is being extinguished. You've run out of good karma. That gives you the so it's not like someone's judging you or blaming you or anything, but if you do a certain amount of goodness and you still haven't gone into the insight of where did this goodness come from, and you think of it as self-existent, it will give you pleasure beyond, it will give you results, but then it must end. It must necessarily end.
But I guess like I'm just confused because that seems like the net suffering seems to be more as a pleasure being. Like, I would rather be a human.
No, of course, I think that's one of the points driving home. So if you go through the three ways of interpreting, literal, metaphorical, or karmically, you know, I think that you can interpret it metaphorically to say better practice now as a human. That the lesson is better practice now as a human because you have some choice. But if you think of it in karma and emptiness, then it makes sense that, I mean, again, metaphorical explanation, yeah?
Right, but also, sorry, excuse me, sorry to interrupt.
Is that
but
your
the thing
ego
is that
or is it?
It's both my ego and yours.
Oh, nice.
The thing is that the people who understand Dharma enough to understand that we want to come back as humans, it's a very small fraction of all the beings. So inevitably, the people who are good without understanding Dharma, cause and effect, karma, and how to plant the seeds, they will be born as gods and demigods without knowing what's coming next.
Or Madonnas first, you know, like Madonna or the Tsar of this or,
Right.
or so on. So that's where I was going to next. So even in our human realm, who was it that died around the time Geshe-la was teaching this? Howard Hughes, am I thinking of the right person? Multi-millionaire or something? Yeah. Yeah. Apparently, at the time when he was teaching this, he had flown to New York and sort of booked out like a whole floor of a hospital and 20 doctors of the best things and blah, 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 and nothing saved him. You know, like this, when it comes, when karma is exhausted, when the necessary ending of a course comes, nothing can stop it. So it's not like he had a great opportunity in life to enjoy many things that many people didn't. I think it was also the Tsar of Iran. Geshe-la was talking once about when he was getting really sick and old, he came to New York and flooded the market with diamonds to try and raise enough cash to give him a little bit extra time. You know, and you couldn't buy time. And so when it ends. And those beings had infinitely better existences in the material sense. At their whim, they can buy cars and food and travel and so on, compared to kids we're going to go and see in Nepal, for example. They're stuck in a certain mode, they're not able to get on an airplane, they're not able. So from a metaphorical point of view, you can say the karmas that produce those two existences, what caused him to have all this abundance and then to have to beg for food? And by the time we get to it tonight, we'll come to the last of the four parts of meditation, which are that death is certain, the time of death is uncertain, and only Dharma can help you at the end. We'll go. This becomes a 9-point practice, and we'll get to consider that idea of. At the end, it didn't matter whether you were the Tsar, Howard Hughes, or the kid in Nepal. At the time of death, which will come to every single one here, every one of them there, it didn't matter how many flights you took, or how many chocolates you ate, or how many times you begged for rice. It didn't matter whether you lived on the street, and that was your home, the sidewalk, or it was a tent, or it was part of the palace. At that time, when we'll get to talk about that, it made no difference. They expired all the things, and they used up all the goodness, if you like, because if it was a pleasure to fly around and so on, that was caused by something in the ultimate sense, you know.
Is the fear that some people experience coming from their karma, or?
There's a couple of explanations, right? So one explanation I've heard is that the fear comes from ignorance, and I think that's true. Not knowing. So if the cloud thought it was only cloud, and it's about to be rain because the temperature changed or the time was up to be cloud, then it's fearful because it will no longer be cloud. It doesn't understand the true nature of itself, which is it's just going to continue as water. Yeah? So in ignorance, you think you are cloud, or you think there's a difference between cloud and rain and ocean.
But the fear itself.
The fear is the attachment to thinking you are cloud.
But it doesn't feel good though. It's
correct. But fear, so where would fear come from if it doesn't feel good?
Ignorance.
There's some negativity, and the ultimate negativity would be ignorance. Yeah? So, and that's, I think, what they mean when they say in wisdom there is no good or bad or this or that, no coming or going. No. Yeah, it means that there isn't a cloud and there isn't a separation between that and rain. It is a continuum. And from us, in our nature, we think we are this. I think I am this connection of body and mind, which has an identity and a personality. And if I am so attached to me being this kind of Hector, and not aware that when I'm angry, I'm also Hector, and when I'm happy, I'm also Hector, and I am not the anger, and I am not the happy, and I'm not the hair or the beard or the tummy or the age or the whatever. If I identify and lock myself into that, I am the cloud. You try and remove that because it's coming, I am fearful. But knowing, first intellectually and then intrinsically knowing, that you are what you project, what you habituate, what you've always known, then there is no fear when things change. And when Hector feels anger, it's not Hector. When he experiences pleasure, it's not Hector. And then you do that enough times until you habituate that moldability. What is it? It's when it's malleable.
Malleability.
And then you transcend. You transcend all those limitations that you could possibly hold on to. And that's what the Buddha meant by, at some point you'll learn Dharma, because Dharma got me to this insight. At some point, there is no Dharma that got you to no insight. There's no insight. There's no eyesight of I see that this insight as an experience of being. No, it's convoluted, but I hope that answered some of your question. Thanks for not asking it from the ego like the rest of them. Okay, so now this is where we ended last week, and thank you very much for spending an hour reviewing, because my job is give you the building blocks for the building blocks. I can't do any of this for you. Now you've got some concepts that are outside our normal Western, beautifully structured idea of reality, which is mostly focused on external existence. Now you have some options. You can look at the world in a different way. Yeah, and I think that's healthy. I think that's really healthy, because then that begins to say, well, there's